won't tell all of y'all, I worked with these girls for years, and I never asked them to come to my church. And I felt so bad when because I knew they were so strong in their belief that it wouldn't do me no good to ask them to come to my church. And when I seen about North Somerville last week, I thought to myself, you didn't ask them. You never asked them to come to your church. But I was so happy to see them there and know that they have got saved. And Carolyn is going to come and give us their testimony. We're glad to have y'all. Got me. You do good.
Turn that mic on you first. So turn that mic on you first.
Just turn the button up.
I want to thank y'all for asking me here, and I want to tell one that everyone thinks that they're unapproachable. My sister and I, my daddy's family were Jehovah's Witnesses. My mama's family weren't, and they even thought we were untouchable. So, don't feel bad or nothing about that. And I ask that y'all pray for me because I get really nervous when I do this. And I do need y'all's prayers.
Bless her.
Because it's really emotional for me. My dad and mom were Bonnie Tucker. And my grandfather Tucker, his name was Dave. He was a non-denominational preacher. And his oldest son, August Tucker, was a holiness preacher. There was 13 of the brothers and sisters. In the late 1940s, my grandmother answered a knock on her door that would change their life forever. It was a Jehovah's Witness, and she began a home Bible study. As a result of this home Bible study, 6 of the 13 became Jehovah's Witnesses in their adult life. My parents weren't Jehovah's Witnesses. They didn't go to church at all, even though they were raised in church. But we had an aunt and uncle that lived next door to us, and so they began a home Bible study with me and my sister when we were small, and then they took us to the meetings. We were taught the way of the truth, or so we thought, from an early age. We learned door-to-door activity and was taught that it was through this that we gained our salvation and would eventually have everlasting life. We also were taught that it was wrong to celebrate holidays, any holiday. We were not to salute the flag, sing the national anthem, or stand for any of these because it was against our religion. Even though there were people that was over there fighting in different places to give us the freedom to choose a religion, to worship as we please. We were not allowed to have friends outside the organization. And we were taught that those that were not in the organization were bad associations. So as my sister and I grew up and started to date, we were taught that you married in the truth, weren't to marry outside the truth. My sister married in the truth, but I didn't. And because of this, I was considered a bad association because my husband was not in the truth, so therefore I couldn't be like I should be, as strong as I should be. So we were not considered a good association. I continued on going to the meetings, even though sometimes I really felt like that the love that I needed wasn't really there. But because the most of my family were Jehovah's Witnesses, I continued on. My sister married and moved away, and then I really felt alone. By this time I had 2 children, and I taught them as I had been taught, and continued going to the meetings. My son began having problems at school, and when I went to one of the conferences, they said that he was having trouble because he felt like he didn't belong. He was different from the other kids, and so he didn't want to go to school anymore. So I began to think about getting away from the organization. I felt like that I didn't really have a relationship with God anyway, and I wondered sometimes if it even heard my prayers. We didn't have an altar like you have here. There were no group prayers, no prayer requests. There was very few emotions, if any at all, in any of the meetings that we had. They also taught that in 1975 that was going to be the end of the world. And we really believed that. But it came and went. We were still there. But we continued on, even though there was not really any explanation except that there was different light brought out the reason it didn't carry out the way that we were told. I decided that I was going to leave the organization. And in doing this, it would change my life in many ways. Because when you're a baptized Jehovah's Witness and you leave the organization, the others are instructed to shun you and not have any association with you or not talk to you at all. If you remember, my sister and my 6 aunts and uncles and all my cousins, most were all Jehovah's Witnesses, so they were not allowed to speak to me anymore. My sister and I didn't speak to each other for 9 years. When they would come to my mama's next door, because I knew they had such deep faith, I would try not to go up there because I respected her belief. Because I too really still believed that way, even though I didn't want my children to believe like that. I had 2 nieces, and they wanted to see me because they loved me unconditional. They would slip off and come down to my house, and I would say, "Y'all know what's going to happen," but they'd come anyway. The statistics show that Jehovah's Witnesses that leave the organization, the suicide rate among them is 80% higher than the national average of suicide. I was among them as well. At one point, I took too many pills because I just couldn't go on anymore, and my daughter came to me. She said, "Mama," she said, "do you not love me and Joey enough to not do this?" You see, when God created us, He created us with a spiritual need. And if that spiritual need is not met and is not filled, we look for other means to fill that need. This is where addiction habits come in. Many who leave the organization turn to alcohol and drug abuse because of the guilt they feel for leaving, because they have very strong belief, because that's the way you're taught. You go by what the organization says, and you don't question it in any way. So from 1985 to 2001, I was in one addiction or another. From alcohol to drugs to pills, bad relationships, from one to the other. And I thank God for my mom and daddy. If it wasn't for my mom and daddy being there for me and my kids, I don't know what I would have done. They were there for my kids and raised them when their mother wasn't able physically or mentally. I continued on with these addictions because there was a storm in me that I couldn't explain, and I didn't know why it was there. I hadn't been taught to have a relationship one-on-one with Jesus, and I didn't know at that time that He was my friend. I could call on Him any time. He was with me and my children many times throughout my life. If He hadn't been, we wouldn't be here now. In the mid-1990s, I had a very strange phone call. It was a phone call from